Hello. All right, so my talk, which up until this morning was in the schedule, was something like Jay Says Stuff, now has the title, Welcome to the Latent Dystopia, or Welcome Latent Dystopia. Okay. So I should start off, I should explain who I am. And actually, note here is very important, is that, well, it's weirdly, it's almost awkwardly important, is that I've had a beard for a long time until, well, it's actually, now it's been a number of years ago, but for a long time when I was at this conference, I always had this, somewhat long beard, and then, and for a lot of, like, all of my, like, the major profile pictures and everything have a fairly short beard associated with them, as you've seen this photo here. And I really regret shaving yesterday morning because it actually, it ruined some of this effect. And I did it because there was like, and in retrospect, I did not need to shave yesterday morning. I don't know, but regardless, I did. And so this talk will be better with I think with this double here. And you'll see why though. Okay. So I developed Cydia, the alternative to the App Store for jailbroken phones. And that's actually what I was originally invited out here to give talks at 360 iDev, which I've been doing for a long time now, is due to my work on jailbreaking. However, recently I've been working on Orchid, which is a decentralized marketplace for programmable bandwidth. We're trying to build a new surveillance-free, censorship-free internet layer. But as I said, that's slightly out of order. I've been coming to 360 iDev for a long time, giving talks. They oftentimes are listed as incomprehensible. Thank you, John. So, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about this time, and that's what I was going to talk about this time. And honestly, I've just been feeling really, like, you certainly can't tell right now because I've got this big beaming grin on my face, but I've been feeling really, really sad for months about things going on in my life, but also just kind of the state of the world in various ways. And part of me wanted to come here and just channel a Mike Lee talk from 10 years ago. So Mike came here 10 years ago wearing a pirate hat, and Mike just starts yelling at all of us. And it is an incredibly memorable talk for me. Even though I'm not exactly certain I have any memory of what you were yelling at me about, or the entire audience about. Now, one of the things that's been making me feel really, and actually contextually sad here recently, is that we are living inside of a continuing global pandemic, one where we are continuing to have hotspots pop up, and the hotspots that I keep experiencing popping up are around the kinds of things that I and we here do. So there was somebody that I knew in 2020 when this all kind of stuff was beginning. He wrote a thing on Facebook. He's a set dresser for plays. And he said that his entire job function involves people getting together to cough together in the dark. And now that people don't want to do that anymore, it was really difficult for him to actually have a job. And so we started coming and started having events back together, which has been kind of cool, but at the same time, pretty much all of my friends who went to DEF CON, I opted out of going to DEF CON. So pretty much all, I forgot that I've got a mic on my chest. I can't hit my chest. All of my friends who went to DEF CON, I opted out of going to DEF CON, got COVID while they were at DEF CON. Some months ago, I went to ETH Denver to give a talk on some work I was really proud of. I got COVID when I was there. I feel like there's something that we were losing in the world, and it's something that I almost feel is insidious because it's something that I feel like people who are like us, who travel around to conferences, might even be noticing it sooner, and yet we're also trying to ignore it, which is the dissolution of the large-scale almost random community that would end up occurring. There were a lot of cases where things that I'm used to seeing large audiences at have now been very thin. Conferences, maybe people figure out how to make that work because it's worth money to people. But you'll see concerts now. I know a number of musicians that it's very difficult for them now. Even when they figured out how to make money, they find that almost their interest in their field is starting to break down, because it used to be that they would have this really fun thing where they would end up going to local coffee shops and all sorts of stuff and setting up these really thick groups of people to play together or to watch others play. And the experience of being kind of alone has made that really brutal. And of course, I know a number of us have been experiencing, I think people call it Zoom fatigue or whatever. I gave a talk remotely here 2 years ago, which I called Working from Hell. So I had a lot of experience doing remote work, and I actually really enjoy remote work. But I think one of the weird punchlines of it is that I think it's totally fine to work from home. I just don't really want to have to live there all the time. And the experience of being home all the time, somewhat isolated, and connecting my work into it at the same time was extremely, for something like me who's so used to standing in front of crowds and speaking, it was very isolating. My health started to deteriorate. I've gained a lot of weight since I was last year, so also any photos you see of things that involve me is just like I'm 80 pounds heavier. It makes me, I'm on my way back down. So I'm like actually 60 pounds heavier, maybe 65. But, yay, only 65 pounds heavier than when you all last saw me. But one of the things I'm really used to doing is going kind of working inside of a giant crowd, and that's something that I really miss. And so it was like 5 years ago. Time flies. I gave a talk here. I was on the fall of the Roman Empire, and it of course involved tech at the end. By the time we got to the end of it, but one of the things that I was talking about was the stereotypical story of Easter Island, where people oftentimes look at the sudden collapse of that island and the resources that they ended up in some sense squandering, but it actually wasn't a sudden collapse. When the people recently have started looking back and seeing that it was and before my talk, it was like, that was one of the things I was saying in my talk, is that it was like a long drawn out process of people slowly forgetting what it was like in the before times and starting to, well, now we've just got a bunch of rats that are inhabiting the island. I guess we're now eating rats all the time instead of the glorious cornucopia of plants that we used to be eating and everything. So, and so this feeling that I have of kind of the four horsemen of the apocalypse that are coming, and which are named interestingly. Like some of them are more obvious. And so we've had pestilence, although pestilence is also sometimes known as conquest. We have war, which is not conquest. And the specific age that I am is I've grown up in a world where I've kind of understood war to be something that's among large superpowers is something that has been kind of on its way down, and as we break down the walls and barriers, and that we're trying to, we still have issues and things, but it's something that we are continuing to go down the path of thinking about war. There's one of them that's honestly, it just kind of feels like capitalism. When you really read it, it's famine, but it's actually the food market dealer is apparently the horseman. Here actually, when I originally thought of the concept for this talk, I wanted to come up here, and because that's what I was really feeling at that moment. I wanted to talk about all of these surveillance issues and all of the internet control issues that have been happening. Recently, in the field that I've been in, there have been a lot of crackdowns on the ability to do anonymous payments, but interestingly, not with a service. There have been crackdowns on people publishing source code on places like GitHub that would allow people to build systems that build anonymous systems. Actually, there was moments where I was like, I almost built something similar in that direction. And now maybe I'm glad I didn't, because that guy's in jail in Amsterdam somewhere. So, I don't know, this meme I think sums it up. And then there's the fourth horseman. And the fourth horseman is described as death, which rides in with Hades. And maybe the fourth horseman, at least according to a lot of the friends that I have that have been telling me this for the past, 25 years, the fourth horseman is the AI singularity that is coming to destroy us all. That we are going to bring forth ourselves, and that is going to end up turning us all into paperclips or whatever. But then again, I also feel like oftentimes this AI has been promised to us, not promised, the negative sense, as this extremely destructive force. And everyone always says that we are at the brink of it, and every single moment it always feels like then they send in their toy soldiers. Now this is something that I've had people say, it's oh, it's moving goalposts, or it's some kind of scope creep. But I also will say that, 25 years ago, when I was sitting around in college in cognitive science classes and thinking about AI, we oftentimes thought about artificial intelligent systems as things that had some agency to them. Like what in fact is life if it doesn't have agency? And so to the extent to which something has no agency, I guess I'm not going to fear it, no matter how much smarter it is than me, no matter how much it obsoletes me. The point at which I guess, well, minus capitalism, which was of course that earlier before the third horse, because obsolescence in a world of capitalism does suck. But the feeling though of being turned into a paperclip, I just haven't felt yet. What we've been experiencing recently has been a very strong push into the capabilities of machine learning. We've been, one of the big things we've seen recently has been GPT-3, which is I think it's generalized, pre-trained, pre-trained, okay, maybe that's the word. So of course here we have Megatron training at the gym, and this is arguably known as GPT-3. So, which is and the big concern people often bring up is that we're going to see in the near future artificial intelligent chatbots that are going to come and talk us out of all of our money and do things. And maybe this is possible. This is something that maybe we should be really concerned about. But clearly, as I'm certain now you've all figured out, even if not at the very beginning of the talk, you've figured out within the last few slides. A lot of my talk today is about is machine learning for automated image synthesis. And so we've seen DALL-E come out recently, or in the last couple of years, and DALL-E made a big splash in its ability to take text prompts and generate from that images. And so you can, for example, say, I would like to have Megatron training at a gym, and it generates a photo of that for you. But the acceleration of this has been extremely fast in recent months and now in the past week with the advancements in the open source models. So I nearly actually wanted to call this talk Welcome to the Disco Dystopia after Disco Diffusion. Partly just because I loved the premise of the you're in a dystopia, but it somehow still feels like you're at the disco. But I didn't actually use disco diffusion for any of this. I used a model called stable diffusion. And Welcome to the Stable Diffusion was my title for then a couple of days until I, first of all, wanted to generalize the title. And also, I started to feel like the latent terminology was better for trying to get the setup of the world feeling bad. I don't know. I got my sadness in there as my prefix talk built out of slides that we can now reference for this talk. So these models are called a latent diffusion model. And so now there's a talk actually right before mine, which was on a picture is worth 1,000 lines of code. Maybe a picture is worth as what you'll make of it. Although I will certainly say that this picture has taught me nothing. So the knowledge that goes into the pictures is probably quite useful. But maybe someone in the audience can understand latent diffusion from this photo. I went through and I've got a sequence of images that I think will help with part of what's going on with latent diffusion. Not the math of it, although actually the reason this math slide here is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to show, so latent diffusion ends up taking random noise and then slowly adjusting what's in the random noise to decrease the cost. This is a bad explanation, but it's to decrease the cost towards being able to generate an image that would have been labeled similar to some text prompt. But the reason why I describe it like that is I'm actually going to show you the steps of refinement towards an image. And in order to make that work, the stable diffusion software it had some issues with relatively prime steps. And so I So I had to fix a bug in the code for it. But because of that, I'm also not 100% certain that the thing that I'm resulting in is a perfect sequence of events. Because like as we shift between prime factors, I think that there's like some thing going on. But this is not the first step. The first step I think is much more like static. I couldn't get the first step easily dumped in the short period of time I allocated towards this. This is like one step of refinement of trying to generate a horse. You can see it's starting to find areas of the random noise that maybe start feeling like parts of a horse, and it starts trying to sketch those in. You could almost maybe even imagine an artist looking at some kind of area of waves and thinking, oh, wait a second, maybe I see a horse in there. Now, the problem is that this horse is somewhat demented in its form. And I think that that's now making it realize that actually, wait a second, maybe it would have been better if there were almost two horses here. Totally shifts where it's looking at. Gets rid of the second horse. Starts changing around the facial angles, although actually, I feel like this felt more realistic to me than this, but it's got a direction it's going in there. I think that's where I stopped, because now I'm getting to like factors that are actually, got a couple more. Factors that are actually even divisions of the time step. But this, you can see now, we've managed to go from noise with relatively minor modifications each time towards the model of a horse. And when you give it the text prompt, what it's effectively doing is it's trying to take all the text you give it, and it's trying to find something related to all of that text. And so if you were describing Megatron and there are parts of it that, oh, wait a second, I could start this body-like thing that I was drawing for some other reason, maybe that's what Megatron can start being built out of. You start mentioning the gym, it starts noticing things that can start being turned into weights or weight equipment. But it also has to keep the composition correct, because otherwise the meshing between the parts starts to fall apart. And so you give it a number of these refinement steps, and it eventually constructs something. Oh, actually, there was a little bit further, and I feel like worse, but maybe better. Okay, so this is the only real photo in my entire talk. So this is the avatar photo I normally put up for myself at the beginning of my talk when I say, hello, my name is Jay. Now I give the intro of who I am. Fun thing, because we're taking images and we're refining them and moving them closer and closer towards some target, is that you can seed it with an image. And you can have it generate from that image the next step. And then, don't just go one step, give it another 30 or 40 some steps. And so we can take my standard avatar photo and we can construct, what if it were painting by and arguably of Van Gogh? Sork with a pearl earring. Mona Lisa with a much more like dramatic change of the underlying image. John Oliver, which I also think is interesting. John Oliver, his set, other than during the pandemic when he was in the white void, is always the city skyline image that they have behind him. And so a lot of the images you see of him are screen grabs of his show, where he has that skyline image behind him. And so we see John Oliver, and it's like, oh, I've got to add the skyline. That's what's really going to make this John Oliver big. A horse. Now, an interesting aspect of this is that because you can now feed it images as input and you can get refinements as output, the prompts that you give end up mattering a lot. It starts turning what I feel like was art into what was art with paintbrushes. It's turning it into art with computers. And it's not that, when you see people who are getting really good results out of these systems, they're spending a lot of time on prompt engineering, and they're spending a lot of time on isolating their steps with their diffusion. Somebody actually recently released, there's been so much, things have been going so fast this past week because these now open source and we're able to get other models for them. Somebody released a Photoshop plugin for stable diffusion, where you can draw in with just like, I want like a river there, just take a blue swab, put it there. And then you describe what you want, and it gives you an initial image. But then you're like, okay, that part there was kind of demented. I'm going to erase that part, draw in something quickly, put a box around it, and then make it so that the parts of the image that I didn't erase cannot change. So when it tries to make all of its shifts in the diffusion process, it is forced to only change the parts that you're letting it change in its process. And by that process, elaborately construct over the course of, in the same way that somebody sits around with Photoshop, carefully editing with the other tools you're given, like selection tools and magic lassos and clone brushes and everything, are sitting there now using these much more advanced AI tools in order to construct the image, and yet it's still a very complicated and very artistic process. And so here Bob Ross with it now painting the tricorder. It's also interesting, though, the extent to which this model knows things. So this is a painting as if it were by Jean-Paul Rappel, who I don't know of. I'm not sufficiently, I kind of recognize this art style. I feel like I should, but I didn't recognize the name. This algorithm seems to recognize all these different artists' names, their styles. He knows a lot of famous people. And it's around here where I'm just like, I'm curious what it generates for like avatar images, for like, maybe I'm, got a Twitter account, I need an avatar image for it for something, I feed it. I thought to put in Sork. I didn't just put in Sork, I put an avatar for Sork. Almost every image you get when you put in Sork looks about like this person, which I feel looks a lot like me. Now, it's not as close to me as John Oliver, and what I'm really curious about is if there's somebody that I don't know of, like some actually famous person, because I just don't even think there are enough photos of me out there for this system to have trained on me. And yet, what's been interesting about it is that, so man giving lecture, okay? So it's very good at generating people who look like they're asleep, generating people who look like they're demons, and generating people who look like they're zombies. But if you say Sork giving lecture, it always gives you something that if I squint a little bit, I think it's me. And the sketch artist version of this, I've tried like thinking, like, what seems to be Sork to this algorithm? It seems Sork has straight, slightly wavy but no curls, brown shoulder-length hair that is parted in the middle with notably uneven split ends, wears grayscale, often black clothing with a pair of smallish glasses, has a big nose and a high forehead, keeps a beard that these days is mostly an accident of being too lazy to consistently shave, and of course, has dimples. But now it's fun. So it's like Sork on a skateboard, or Sork skateboarding. It doesn't always understand what you're trying to do there. Sork with flip-through thing that sort of looks like a sculpture of a skateboard. Sork getting married. Now this one does not look as much like me as normally it still looks, the description I just provided, it has all of these properties. I've normally been cherry-picking one that looks a little bit more like me. All of them look a little bit like this. Marriage ones are really difficult because what it really likes to do is to try to just put the same face on both sides. Because it doesn't really have an understanding, because it generated a face, and it's optimizing for, I want to generate Sork. And it's like, okay, I can generate Sork, I just have to add a scraggly beard, and I have to get the hair to be the right length of the shoulder length, incorrectly chopped off. And so it manages to, and so it was actually difficult to find one that actually fit the married profile, but also most of them look more like me. Sork making waffles. Sork. Oh, actually, I've got the prompts right here, so I should scroll forward a little bit. It was like Sork on a space shuttle or something. No, Sork flying a plane. Sork wearing a spacesuit. Photograph of Sork fighting with an alien holding an axe. And Sork shaking hands with Steve Jobs. Another complicated one is his two faces, and so this one took me a while to try to find. And I think this then is where we start to get into the concerns a lot of people have with this technology. Because this is certainly in a shot that would never happen. And this is something where I'm now utilizing somebody who might have been annoyed that this would have happened. And by the way, to show how complicated this is, John Oliver shaking hands with Steve Jobs, and it just tries to merge all of the faces because it really knows who John Oliver is and it really knows who Steve Jobs are, but it just can't square the difference somehow. But A concern that a lot of people that have been expressing is that this can be used for some kind of information warfare, that we would see this kind of technology used in order to generate fake imagery that describes scenarios that trick people into thinking that, oh yeah, remember that time that Sorek shook hands with Steve Jobs? And by the way, the thing that I think we would really want to do in this case is, I mean, if the model knows Sorek well enough that you're able to actually like get a face that's close enough to mine that if we then combine this with deepfake technology, we can then get a really realistic version of me that the image maintains its composition. If you don't have the property of whatever it's pulling for Sorek, because I really don't think there are enough photos of me to have nailed as many properties of me for that deepfake to be close enough. But if he doesn't, what you do is you go into one of those "what celebrity do I look like" apps, figure out what celebrity you look like, then make this AI generate that celebrity, which is almost the weird back opposite of what you usually use the deepfake stuff for, where you like you use something and then you try to make it look like a celebrity. It's like, no. This algorithm will nail it looking like Steve Jobs. Then the problem is that, well, you only look sort of like Steve Jobs, so we're going to deepfake in the other direction and make it look like you. But so that's a concern that a lot of people have. I guess I've been kind of indifferent to this in the sense that I feel like if the bar gets low enough on this sort of thing, maybe finally people will stop trusting the stuff that's online. Certainly you've heard that argument before, though. But it's one where I think it's a really important discussion to have with people. But I still haven't felt that this is necessarily the apocalypse. People have noted that this is going to allow you to generate near infinite quantities of spam, and that spam will be much more realistic than before and much more difficult to block. And that does sound somewhat problematic. I'm still not certain. I am terrified of large quantities of spam. Although the ability to ask an algorithm to generate large quantities of spam, I can't imagine somebody would have made a photo just like this, is kind of cool. What actually finally terrified me about this tech was is it really terrifying? Is it really? It's not really terrifying. It finally made me think, oh no, I'm going to hate this so much. Is somebody on Hacker News, his username is, or his or her username is XG15, pointed out that you go on Amazon and you see all the Amazon product documentation and product shots. And a lot of them nowadays are just content farmed, and they've got all sorts of weird misspellings in them. And soon you're going to go there, and the person holding the thing is going to have 10 fingers that are twisted through each other, and that's just what we're just going to have to put up with from now on. Because the cheapness of constructing this is just too good. The being able to get a slide that has Megatron training at the gym, but it doesn't actually look like there's too much red and it doesn't have the right head, but it's close enough. It's so much cooler to actually have him at the gym. And so being able to quickly generate all this imagery is going to, I think, drastically lower the standard of quality that we end up seeing across all of the stuff that we work with, because this isn't the cost center for a lot of, isn't the value driver for a lot of people. And we've seen stuff like this happen before. It's not like that's a new phenomenon. Using Bootstrap, when Bootstrap was released, making it really easy to construct somewhat complicated websites that had multiple columns and hero imagery and all sorts of stuff. Suddenly the entire web was Bootstrap, and we all were like, oh, not another Bootstrap site. And now but at least Bootstrap didn't have buttons that were occasionally flickering. They didn't have text that was written in some language where everyone's like, what language is this in? And I'm like, you'll find out. And I think one of the ways we're going to start to see this here is iPhone icons. Because you can actually think, if you just go into Stable Diffusion as it stands, and you say iPhone app icon of, and you start trying to describe what you want an icon of, it even puts little borders on it. It tries to get it in the right aspect ratio sometimes. I'm like, yeah, I could see some game deciding this is their icon. Do I like this icon? No. Is the designer, do I like the spacing? No. And I'm not even a designer. I'm certain the designers here in the audience might be freaking out of this. This icon, weirdly, is a tech person. This is where the designers now freak out. I almost think it looks kind of cool. Clearly it doesn't, but I'm not a designer. I could see using this icon. I asked it for an app icon for a to-do list. I didn't really like this one. I realized prompt engineering. I want a good app icon for a to-do list. Yeah, that's a little better. This one, But this is another good app icon for to-do list. Then I started being like, okay, I'm cherry picking a little bit more. Like this is kind of an interesting logo idea. To-do list, okay. And of course, we don't have the rounded corner because it seems like it either wants a rounded corner or wants the leathery background that you would see in the skeuomorphic icons from a while ago. And it'll give us to Apple and they put in borders. This icon I was asking about a calendar. I don't know, it looks like a calendar, but I like this icon. Tells you how little taste I like. Then I'm like, well, let's try some stuff. John Oliver on a horse. And you get options. Some of them better than others. That was kind of cool. I could see a Clubhouse-like app deciding that this was their icon. Late night talk show streaming application sort of thing, although they probably run into issues using John Oliver's face, but then again, we're not even certain if that's really true. And which I guess brings us to the next issue, which is, so this kind of talk, by the way, the kind of talk that I generally give is something that was pioneered by, well, not pioneered, maybe I'm not cultured enough to know who pioneered it, but I know of it as a Lawrence Lessig style talk. Lawrence Lessig is a copyright lawyer, and he kind of made infamous in this kind of tech conference community, having the talk that has a large number of slides that are images that are maybe more for a laugh gag than necessarily informative, that help you drive the thought along so that you have an outline that you maintain behind you, that the audience can remember key parts of it because it was fun to remember some of the moments of what happened, the ability to just generate random stuff, whatever I want. I mean, I would spend some time going on Google Images trying to find something that would fit. I would start modifying my outline sometimes because I finally found an image that was just too good not to use. And now I can sit there and I can take that image, just input mod. I can do all sorts of ridiculous things. The image that I had of Mike Lee wearing the pirate hat over his eyes didn't actually happen. But I was able to have it, and it was cool. And that's where we get into the kind of concluding part of this talk, where I always end up having, the talks are ostensibly about something boring in the realm of copyright or policy, regulation, something along those lines. And so now it's time to debate. Are you going to fall asleep? But it's the Lord lets us talk. So y'all have heard of GitHub Copilot. One of the things I asked Stable Diffusion for GitHub Copilot, and it gave me this. Cool. Most of what it gave me, however, was this: a man sitting inside of an airplane with the cockpit controls looking more like some kind of laptop spreadsheet that he's working on, and then a really creepy co-pilot looking over his shoulder, trying to quote help unquote. And I think that's important to kind of note is that there's a lot of prompt engineering that now goes into this. One of my favorite examples of one of these automated AI GPT-3 code generator things, somebody was, it was for, I should remember, it was, I think it's for Moz last year or something. They wanted to generate some program that would check all these cases. And there's a really obvious way of doing it that is extremely slow, and then there's a way where you can do it that effectively cuts down the time into something, fraction of it. And the prompt change, if you said, like, if you described what you wanted, it would generate really slow code. But if you said what you wanted and then you tacked on the end using fancy math, it just it cut right to the quick. It was like, oh, I know what you mean. But I also think that there's some aspect of this that just feels like copyright laundry, where we've got, like in the case of these photos, right, is that like, okay, the reason why the reason why Stable Diffusion knows what a pirate looks like is because somebody has drawn a bunch of images of pirates, people took a bunch of photos of pirates, and then it was able to kind of figure out the shared characteristics of all those things that it was seeing within, this naive way of putting it, some latent compressed pixel space of, how it's trying to figure out with the vector compression of the text. But like it only knows about things that it's seen. Like if I describe a person, like when I put in one of you in the audience, unless you're, I guess like me, you've got a bunch of photos and apparently people are putting it, it might not know who you are. It's actually, if I put in Jay Freeman, it doesn't know who Jay Freeman is, right? Because that's not a name that I'd associate with. And so But if somebody were to take a bunch of photos of me, well, those photos would be copywritten by them. And now there's this question of, well, if you use a photo of me that somebody else made in order to make a derivative work of that photo of me, I mean, I don't even own that photo. That's the weird thing oftentimes in US copyright law. And so a feeling that I've had recently is that this kind of, I feel like, kind of breaks down some of the weaponry that we've had in the open source ecosystems. Like the stalemate that we've been trying to build with the closed source community has been that, okay, well, you've got copyright and you're trying to make it so that people are reliant upon you for the software and everything, and it's like, okay, well, that's fine. We've got copyleft on the other side. And on copyleft, if you use any of our code, you have to be on our side. Like, it turns it into a big sided war between two parties. And here now we've got, clearly knows where Richard's phone is. Now we've got this feeling of, well, all of my code that I put out there specifically because I wanted to help other open source people, that I was open sourcing, not directly for my benefit, but because I wanted to fight that fight with other people and allow them to utilize that, well, now it's just getting washed through Microsoft's, that's the most brutal part of it, Microsoft's algorithm in order to generate it into something that can be used mostly one-sided by people like them, because it's not like I've got all of the source code for all the closed source apps that I can run through this sort of algorithm in order to help me. So that's annoying, but I also think that this might be where we start to see art. I don't even get the open source market. I think the place where we're going to start seeing the copyright lawsuits come out is when somebody takes this kind of design and manages to use it to generate music. So I do a lot of work arguing at the Copyright Office with over jailbreaking and the triennial rulemaking process and DMCA exemptions and things like that. And the really and the interesting thing that I keep noting is that almost no matter what thing we're looking at, the people who are arguing with us, you want to jailbreak a car? No, no, no. Who shows up? The Recording Industry Association of America shows up, because they are convinced that there are people who are going to jailbreak their car and then sit in their garage with their car on. That's the way that they're going to get all the music, and they're going to pirate all the music. And I'm like, that's not how people are pirating music right now. But when the RIA starts to see that you're able to just automatically generate some kind of, I want a Taylor Swift song or I want a Billy Joel song sung by Taylor Swift, that I like a song like one that Billy Joel would write, sung by Taylor Swift, and I want it to have some kind of like catchy beat in the background, and it's like I've got just the beat, and it uses the one from Under Pressure, which was then stolen by Vanilla Ice for Ice Ice Baby, and there's a massive lawsuit over that. That is where I think we're going to see the amazing lawsuit and actually see what happens. And then the final thing I want to note is that I've been kind of directly. So I work in security, right? And when you look at the stuff that GitHub Copilot generates, it's taking all of this code that's on GitHub, a lot of which isn't that good, and it's learning about it, and then it's automatically generating stuff that looks like that code. And so one of the examples on the Copilot main website actually has a serious security vulnerability in it. They were like, look how easy this was. You wanted to generate this? Tab complete. Oh, we've got a whole page of code. And it's like, no, don't do that. No, like, don't, it's really important. You write software. If somebody in an art image has has 6 fingers, that's annoying, but it's fine. That's not going to harm other people. But if you automatically generate a bunch of code that has some kind of security vulnerability in it, and then a bunch of people end up losing money or losing inventory or their personal information gets stolen, that's horrifying. And so I've been really concerned about where we're kind of going in this regards of trying to, before we've even figured out how to solve expert programmers for being able to write buggy code, we are now deciding to have amateur computer programs automatically write buggy code that may or may not ever get reviewed by somebody who knows what they're doing. And so here to get to any questions, but I actually want to tell one more quick anecdote at the end, which is that I was in there was somebody that I know who, there was a creationist who was coming to UCSB campus at one point back 25 years ago, and he was giving a talk. And it was interesting because at the end of his, there was somebody that I knew who was on the exact opposite side of that argument. And he was ready to go and eviscerate his point. And it turned the other direction. The creationist had a bottomless pit of slides because he had seen every single argument that anyone had ever made. And he was able to pull up a slide for every single point that you could possibly have and say, like, yes, I got the perfect slide for that, and he'd put it up. And so at this point, I wish I had the algorithm ready to type live, so if you ask me a question, I could just pull up a slide, but I don't. Any questions? I've got a few minutes, I guess. Yes.
How much did you spend on all the time?
So I only used Stable Diffusion. On Stable Diffusion, any of you can go download. It's open source. It'll run on your laptop. That's the big trick, is that they managed to make it fast enough to run on a laptop and generate image, even with CPUs, generate images. It takes minutes, but like on like a reasonable GPU, if you've got a good computer, it can generate them in 9 to seconds. And so I was generating them on my laptop, but then I was like, I was generating them on my desktop computer, but I was like, actually, like, no, I really gotta get these slides right. I need it's about like a day and a half. I just need to, and so I got an EC2 instance that cost $3 an hour, and I was able to generate images like a batch of 8 in 1 minute. So, not much. Yeah.
So have you compared like Dolly to measuring any of those?
I have not. It got really fun for me when I was able to just sit around for an entire day generating. I generated thousands of images. On many hundreds of prompts, playing around trying to get something that I felt would like maybe convincingly look like Mike Lee from 10 years ago. So, yeah. Yes. Yeah, noting about the downsides of this tech, we used them with images of people. Yeah, that was like when I was talking about the information warfare aspect of it. My hope is that like right now, it is possible. You've got a skilled artist and you have somebody working with deep fake tech, and they can build these things. The issue is that right now it's sufficiently expensive and sufficiently complicated that y'all just can assume that everything you see is probably okay. And then we target the people who are generating the really bad misinformation to try to exclude them from being able to post things. Whereas once I think you get to a point where everything can be fake, hopefully it becomes much less likely that you believe anything, which is a different version of the dystopia, but I also think that it's one that it's almost a utopia. So. All right. Oh, okay, because it's you.
So, do you see this making copyright irrelevant because it's going to be so much easier to copy something and slightly modify it very quickly?
Yeah, what do I think this is going to do to copyright? Yeah, no, I'm really interested to see what this does to copyright. Like I think when they do it to music, that will cause the RA to sue, and then we're going to find out if copyright has any teeth. And because it does with photographs, it really is like if this is legal, this is ridiculous. I mean, like I have no interest right now in the things I was using Adobe stock for, but for all I know, this was literally trained on Adobe stock. If you looked at that when I did the sequence with the horse, in the bottom left-hand corner, it was manifesting a watermark of some form, a little signature. I have a sequence here, avatar of sort, and you'll see it doing something similar in the bottom left. If anyone figures out what this is, because it's probably not me, right? But like, if there's like some actor I don't know of, some musician that I don't know of, I would love to find out. All right, thank you so much.